Okay, let's pray. Dear God, we do just want to calm our hearts, settle our hearts before you, and ask you to be our teacher this morning and help us, guide us into truth. As you have been doing this week, as we've been doing with our study, we thank you for your Holy Spirit, our teacher. We thank you that you have sent him to indwell us, that you have taught us that we are now your temple, and we need to consider certain things in light of that truth. And Lord, I just ask that you would just help us to focus this morning and get the big picture of the book of Haggai. And we just thank you for your word. We thank you that it is pure and perfect and tried and tested. We thank you that it is yours, that we can know you. And we just ask that you would guide us this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so we're going to do just a really quick review. And what we're going to do is we're going to, in a sense, walk through the post-exile time up to this point. So what may assist you for our review this morning is our at-a-glance chart of Ezra. Not of Haggai, but of our at-a-glance of Ezra. So we're going to basically just walk through and we're going to kind of answer. The reason why I have you get your at-a-glance chart out is because, well, hopefully if you filled it out, I'm looking at one that's blank. But hopefully if you've been filling it out, if you've been diligent to write down the themes, you can also look at your observation worksheets. But we're just going to go chapter by chapter and hit like a big theme idea, okay?
That's what I've been waiting for.
Okay, so chapter 1, who issues a decree to rebuild the temple of God?
Cyrus.
Cyrus, very good.
I had that one.
There you go. Yeah, we got that one. Okay, chapter 2. What is in chapter 2 of Ezra? What does it consist of? I mean, it is a lot of
the people.
Names, right? It's just a list of, and who are they? Who are these people that the Lord sought fit to write down in the book of Ezra?
Amen.
Lots of sons.
Lots of sons.
God's people returning from
Right.
exile.
So chapter 1, we have the decree that is issued. Chapter 2, we see that some people, God stirred up their hearts to be obedient and to return to the land, right? Now that doesn't mean that all the people came back. It's a certain amount and it's laid out there. God knows exactly every single one of them and what their purpose is and all the plans. We talked about that, what we learned about God just from him making a list of these returnees. Chapter 3, what happens in chapter 3?
Foundation is laid and the work begins.
Yes, and what else is, there's two things that are built in that chapter.
The altar.
The altar's built and the foundations are laid. And then what did they celebrate?
Oh, Passover, wasn't it?
The Feast of Booths.
Oh.
Okay, so they have the Feast of Booths. And we'll remember too that at the end of that chapter, we have the discussion of the people shouting for joy and praising the Lord, but it's also mingled with
They were sad.
Crying for those who had remembered.
those who remember the temple. They're mourning it in a sense. It's a bittersweet, right? Chapter 4, work stops on the temple. Why?
Got afraid.
The
Why?
enemies of God caused the rebuilding.
Because they wouldn't let them help.
Right.
Was that the time? when
Right.
They wouldn't let them
So
help
we
them?
have these enemies of God that enter the scene on this post-exile timeline, and they are discouraging them. They get, they hire counselors to speak against them to kind of thwart their counsel. It's a discouragement. It's a fear. It's a campaign of fear. And so work stops. Chapter 5, work resumes. Why does work resume?
The eye of the Lord oversees the rebuilding of his house.
The eye of the Lord's upon them, and there's a ministry. There's a ministry of two specific men, and those two specific men,
Haggai and Zechariah.
Haggai and Zechariah, and let me ask you this question, just so that we can keep it in context. Is there no longer opposition in
No,
chapter
no.
5?
They still are there.
No, it remains, and we know that from our chapter 4, where we find out that that this is going all the way up into the reign of Artaxerxes, right? So this is not just, oh, it's sunshine and roses and it's so easy to build this temple, but we have the ministry of Haggai and Zechariah that encourages them to build the temple. Then in chapter 6 of Ezra, what happens? The temple is completed. And how does that happen according to verse 14? It's a couple of things that work together.
Well, according to the command of God, is that what?
Yes, according to the command of God. So it's because they're being obedient, right? They are being obedient to build the temple as he has said to do. But it's also the command of God in the sense of he prophesied that it would be rebuilt, right? And it's also built, how else is it built? There's a working together. There's the man.
Oh, the
there's
decree of
God side.
Cyrus and
Darius.
Darius?
So then we also see that there's the decree of Cyrus and Darius or Darius or however you want to say it. And we also have Artaxerxes mentioned there too. Do you remember why Artaxerxes was mentioned?
Well, he comes in while they're doing it, doesn't he? Isn't it?
Well, the
at
temple's
end?
already built by the time, because that verse 14 is not just talking about the temple being built,
Oh,
right? The temple is completed in Darius's time.
Okay.
But there's still opposition. Remember, we talked about those enemies? There's still opposition all the way up to the time of Artaxerxes. And so they're saying, this is talking about the city of Jerusalem. We're talking about the walls and that kind of thing. And we'll get into that more. Okay, so that's a pretty good review of what we've done in the first 6 chapters of Ezra. Now, something major has happened in these events in the hearts of those returned exiles. They have moved from fear, intimidation, and failure to obey God to obedience and rebuilding and rejoicing. And we know that the threats and intimidations, the campaigns against Israel did not stop. So what was different? What caused this change?
The presence of the Lord.
Yeah.
The presence of the Lord, and how did they know? Because was the Lord present with them the whole time?
Yeah, but Haggai
Yes,
and
but
Zechariah are the ones that.
Yeah, they have a really powerful ministry. And chapter 5 of Ezra, in verses 1 and 2, tell us about the ministry of 2 men, Haggai and Zechariah. And this week we looked closely at the short-lived but highly successful ministry of Haggai. I mean, he's one of the very few prophets that had a great ministry where the people responded, right? Okay, so Haggai's messages can be divided into 4 messages. So we're going to try to look at each of them this morning and see what God will have to show us. So we're going to start, and what you'll want to do is you'll want to have your observation worksheets for the entire book of Haggai out. We're not going to probably be back at Ezra, so just have your Haggai out. And then have it sitting next to your homework. And then I'll direct you when we kind of re-enter. But a lot of this will be literally just walking through the book of Haggai. Okay, so message number 1 is found in chapter 1. Now you could do this in a timeline form, or you could do it in a list form, however you want to do it on your paper. But we're going to be looking at the 4 messages of Haggai. And so we're going to start with message 1, and it's chapter 1. Okay? And we're going to do the typical precept thing, and we're going to answer who, what, when, where, why, and how questions, because we want to make sure that we're getting the details of what's going on. So who spoke message number 1?
Haggai.
Haggai. Oh, that's a given, right? It's a gimme, right? So who is Haggai? Who spoke it? And we know that he is a prophet. And did you notice? And they had us mark, the word of the Lord came by, and then he says it over and over and over, that this is the word of the Lord, thus saith the Lord. All of those kinds of things, so that you never start to think that Haggai is going off script, right?
Yeah.
He is speaking only what the Lord has told him to speak in these messages. So it's Haggai the prophet, but it is the word of the Lord. Okay, and this is pretty important to remember because, again, we're on that post-exile timeline. This is the first prophet to speak since they got back. Can you imagine? It's been years. Now, Daniel's been doing his thing, right? But what Daniel's been doing has kind of been in secret, in a sense, or it's been almost a ministry to these nations, right? Because he's been telling Nebuchadnezzar about his dreams, and he's been telling, that kind of thing. But he's not speaking to the people in words of encouragement the way that Haggai is all of a sudden, thus saith the Lord, and the Lord has encouraging words. Yay, we have encouraging words. So this is pretty important. Okay, so to who or whom is this message given?
To Zerubbabel and Joshua.
Okay, Zerubbabel and Joshua. He's called Jeshua in Ezra. So we're talking about the same guy. We've looked at that before. Okay, so who are these men? Who is Zerubbabel?
He's a governor.
He is a governor.
And he's actually the family line of the former king of Judah.
Yeah, so he has a kingly place. But is he king? No, he's not. He's a governor. But he has, in a sense, a right to rule, except for there's been a little bit of a problem with his ancestors, right? And we're going to get to that in a minute. Okay, now that we have Joshua or Jeshua, whichever you want to call him, what is he?
He's the son of a high priest.
He's the son of a high priest. What does that make him? If he's going to go into the family business, what's he going to do?
Be a priest.
He'll be a priest.
He's going to be a priest. So he is a high priest. So this message from Haggai, from the Lord, is to these two men, who is a governor and a priest. So we have the civil side and we have the religious side of life being addressed here, right? And it's really important to remember that. Okay, now, when, the next question is, when was this delivered?
Second year of Darius.
The 6th month.
Wow.
Year 6 months.
This got really specific.
First day.
Isn't this fun? I love this. Okay, we did our timeline last week. We had so much fun with it. But this is just really cool. So we've got specific days. We've got, I'm sorry, what was it, the second year?
Second year, 6th month, first day.
Year of Darius. We have this 6th month. We have the, what day? First? First day. Okay. Now, if you did a little bit of looking in your commentaries, they might have shown you what days those are. So, but if you didn't, I thought this is really interesting. This is the first. This is how you write it in there. The first of Ehul. That's the month, which is August 29th, and the year is 520 BC. Okay, it's that 6th month, it's the first day. This, interestingly enough, is the day of the new moon.
Oh.
Okay, so there's a new moon, and likely that means that there's a new moon festival or a new moon celebration going on in Jerusalem, because remember, Ezra told us that they started celebrating those things back when they laid the foundation. Back when they had the altar, they started doing the celebrations for the new moon. So we have a ready audience, right? I mean, he's speaking to these people, but these people also have a whole bunch of people in Jerusalem on this day to celebrate the new moon, okay? So, what was the message? What were the people saying according to verse 2?
Not time to build.
The time has not come, even the time for the house of the Lord to be rebuilt. Now, but let me ask you this, where were they living? According to verses 4 and 9.
In their own paneled houses.
Yeah, so it's not time to build for the Lord, but it is time, and I'm enjoying my house that I built, right? So there's a little bit of a problem there that you kind of see without having to, the writing's on the wall that there's a problem there. Okay, now what was life like for these people, according to verses 6 and 9 through 11?
Not very satisfying.
Not very good. A lot of labor with
Yeah.
very little.
Yeah,
Very little reward, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of labor with very little reward. So verse 6, you have sown much but harvest little. You eat, but there's not enough to be satisfied. They're going to bed with still hungry, right? And their little kids are going to bed still hungry. And it's just, you drink, but there's not enough to become drunk. I mean, you can't even have fun, people. You put on clothing, but no one is warm enough. So here we are about to enter into the winter, and he's saying, you're not even going to be able to cover yourself to be warm enough for this winter. And then what does it say in verses 9 through 11?
Well, he has, I think he's cursed the land here.
Yes. There is,
He's a drought.
there's a drought on the land, on the mountains, on the grain, on the new wine, on the oil, on what the ground produces, on men, on cattle, and on the labor of your hands. That's really...
And it covers it all.
Yeah, it's a pretty severe. I mean, I was thinking too, as I was kind of reading back through and preparing for this, that might indicate that there was maybe low birth rates among men and low birth rates with the cattle. That even those things that were kind of a natural thing that was going on, you know, maybe children are dying, or you know,
Sure,
those
there
kinds
would
of
have been
things.
disease.
This is a severe situation, and yet they're still working, right? They're still slaving away, and it's just not coming to fruition the way that one would think if the Lord is with you, right? If the Lord's with you, then you get all those blessings, right? You know, it just comes to you easy, doesn't it?
You know what I think is amazing about that, and how we've been able to see in this whole study, is the sovereignty of God. Is the people were taken exile because they did not give the land its Sabbath.
Right.
So the land now has been resting for 70 years. It should be fairly fertile.
Right.
Right.
Right,
But
and yet,
God, it would. So all the natural things say that there should have been abundance.
yes.
But God was not finished with those disobedient people. They still
Right.
needed to come to the end of themselves.
Right, and I think it was really interesting too, because he says there in verse 9, you look for much, but behold, it comes to little. And so it's like they're planting, hoping that harvest is going to come, that should be coming. And then it says, when you bring it home, I blow it away.
Yeah.
And I thought, that, you know, you just get that picture of like wheat just, like he's just like, you kind of, you know how when you're eating in your house and you've got kids around and you're like, where did that go? Like, you know, like, you know, it just all of a sudden it's gone. And it's like it diminished. It diminished when they brought it home. It wasn't as much as they thought it was, but it's like, it's still diminished even more or more quickly. They're going through their stores a lot faster than they would typically. And so it's leaving them hungry. Okay, so who made, we've kind of been saying it, but who made life like this for them?
The Lord.
The Lord. It's from the Lord. And so we always need to remember that when God says that he's in charge of something or he is in something, that means he is.
Yeah.
We need to take him at his word for that. Okay, so what are God's instructions in this message? I did something that I didn't do the first time I read through, and they didn't tell us to do it, but I read through and I just wrote an I next to the verses where there's an instruction and then underlined what the instructions were. And so that may help you, but I'll give you some hints. There are instructions in verses 5, 7, and 8. What are those instructions?
Well, consider your ways.
Consider your ways, that's verse 5. Verse 7?
Same thing.
Consider your ways, okay? Do you think that he wants them to consider their ways?
What do we tell our kids? Think about what you're doing.
I know, it's so true. And verse 8.
Go up to the mountains, bring wood, and rebuild the temple.
Okay, so there's kind of two instructions here, right? So what do those instructions tell you about the people and their relationship to God? What does the consider your ways one tell you about the relationship that they had with God?
They were not depending upon
No.
God. They were living their own
Yeah.
ways. And this was the result
Right.
of living under their own power.
Right, and they weren't walking circumspectly, right? Because if they had been considering their
Yeah,
ways,
yeah.
they probably would have said, there's something amiss here, right? Because, as Kayla said, this should have been a time of blessing. I mean, I don't mean that, I was kind of being facetious, but yes, it should have been a time of blessing. This land had just been sitting there waiting for them to return, and when they return, you would expect that it's fertile, it's ready, they're working hard, they're doing their thing, but there's a little bit of problem, which is that they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So they're not walking circumspectly before the Lord.
And also, Leah, weren't they were in bondage before? They were scattered and now they're brought back home and they're pretty much free, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I mean.
There are
they have-
enemies
they have-
around.
There's enemies
So
and
they
that
have
sort
to
of
stick
thing.
together.
And they are
Servants,
still
No.
vassals, so to
Right.
speak, of the
The king
brain
of
is not working.
the Persia.
Yeah, Persian, Medo-Persian. Like, there's another word that goes with that. The
They rebuild the
Medo-Persians.
temple though.
Yes,
pretty
but they
much.
have received instruction both from the king and from the Lord. They
Right.
know that this is what they're supposed to be doing, but they're not doing it, right? Okay, so
So-
what about that second instruction? What does that tell you about their relationship?
Well, he must not be as important to them as he should be, or they would have built the temple. They
Right.
would have realized God has brought us here, we need to honor him. We
Right.
want to honor him.
But also, if we think back to our Ezra passage, it tells us that they went and got cedars from where?
Lebanon.
Lebanon, and had them shipped out there. Well, this is 16 years later, 14 to 16
yeah.
years, somewhere in there. What happened to the wood? Now we gotta go back out to the mountains and we gotta chop down some more wood.
Because
Where
that's
did
why
it
it says they
go?
have paneled
You probably
houses.
built
They
that.
paneled houses. They used it for themselves. I wonder why it said paneled houses. I couldn't figure
Isn't
out
it interesting?
what that meant.
Isn't
Oh.
it interesting? Now, I mean, that is not, I mean, it's not like clearly stated
Right.
that they have used
Right.
the wood
Right.
for other purposes.
But
If they hadn't used the wood,
They
it
would
would
have
still
it.
be sitting
Yeah.
there, and he
Yeah.
wouldn't be telling them
Yeah.
to go up
Go
into the
get more.
mountains and bring wood and
Yeah.
rebuild the temple, because that had already been provided for years earlier, right? So they may have had their priorities in the wrong place. They may be, we need this wood for this building project instead of for the temple, right? So they've gotten out of skew, their relationship with the Lord. There really is something between them, right?
And Brittany's point is very good because they did have the freedom of choice. While they were in captivity, they did not.
Right, right.
So they had the freedom of choice. Though they knew that the Lord had released them from that bondage,
Yes.
they quickly, in this period of time, and it wasn't that they were disobedient after 14 years. I mean, they quickly went to,
Oh, it was
okay,
fast.
me, which is the
They
same thing that
quickly
we
went
do.
to fear and discouragement,
Right.
right?
So living under our own strength is disobedience to God,
Yes.
will result in suffering.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Okay, so how do the people respond according to verses 12 through 15?
They obeyed.
Yeah,
The Lord.
did you notice that the message is to whom?
Zerubbabel
And Joshua. But that it's not just them that respond, that it is also the people. It says, then Zerubbabel, in verse 12, then Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and Joshua the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, with all the remnant of the people, obeyed the voice of the Lord their God and the words of Haggai the prophet, as the Lord their God had sent him. And the people showed reverence for the Lord. And so we see that they respond. Now, some people, some commentators that you will read, say that verse 13 is another separate message. So that would make for 5 messages in the book of Haggai. But I don't really think it's a full message. So I think it's just like a word of encouragement. You've been obedient. Now here's the word of encouragement. But what is the word of encouragement that is thus saith the Lord in verse 13?
I'm with you.
I am with you, declares the Lord. And so we see that it's like a return, right? It's like they've considered their ways. They're going to be obedient. They're going to go out into the mountains. They're going to cut down some trees. They're going to come back and they're going to build a temple. And God comes in behind and says, I'm with you, according to the mouth of the prophet.
It's that covenant relationship that it was never broken. It was just on pause.
Yes, it was almost for a little while.
Yeah.
A little bit longer than probably one would like. Okay, now who stirs up spirits in men? Now we talked about this all the way back in week 1, when we talked about what God does, what we learned about him. But who does it?
The Lord.
The Lord is the one who stirs up the spirits of men. And what happens in verse 14?
Stirs up Zerubbabel, Joshua, and the remnant of the people.
Yeah.
And they all went to work.
And they all go to work.
Like within 23 days, they're all
I
sitting
know.
working.
I know. And so that's where we have that last the fifth, verse 15 tells us that on the this is the response, and this would be the how, right? The how did they respond? They responded by the 24th day of the same month in the same year. So it's not like the next year, right? 24th day of this 6th month. So we're still in 520 BC, but the way that works out, that ends up being on, I got my little paper. Great. I'm gonna lose all my stuff. Okay. That ends up being the 24th of Elul, the same month, but that works out in our calendar to be September 21st, 520 BC. Now, there may be a couple of reasons. They're obedient, right? But why would there be the gap between the command of the Lord and the beginning of the building of the temple?
They had to go get the materials.
They had some preparation to do. Maybe they had some cleansing and some purifying to do. But also, the 6th month, that Ehul month, is a harvest month. So they are also bringing in, it's the harvest for figs, grapes, and pomegranates. So there's kind of like, there's still, that's going on. And we're going to find out more about that harvest in the future messages, which is really interesting. Okay, so just kind of keep that in your brain as we move forward. So we see that the building resumes. Now, message 2. Did everybody get that if they wanted that? Okay, I'm gonna just erase that part and do message 2 right here. Message 2 is Haggai 2 verses 1 through 9. Okay, now who spoke it?
The word of the Lord. Through Haggai.
Yeah, it's the word of the Lord, but it is through Haggai. I always like to give me questions when we're doing a review, so everybody gets that one right. Okay, so it is to who or whom?
Zerubbabel, Joshua,
Same guys, right?
and the remnant of the people.
But there's the additional that it is mentioned that it is to the remnant of the people. Now that means that we have the leaders being addressed as well as the common lay people, right? The people that are there. Okay, when is this one?
21st day of the 7th month.
Okay, so we have the 21st day of the 7th month. Same year?
Yes.
Same year, second year of Darius? Okay, so that works out for those of you who want to know. And don't you want to know? Didn't you come in going, I wonder what day that really is? It's the 21st day of Tishri. That's the name of that 7th month. And that corresponds to our October 17th. So as you can see, these messages are really close to one another, right? We have September or August 21st to October 17th. Okay, and that is the same year, 520 BC. Okay, now, just so you know, regarding the month of Tishri, that there are numerous festivals in the month of Tishri, in the 7th month. In addition to weekly Sabbaths, there's also the Feast of Trumpets, that's on the first day of the month of Tishri. There's the Day of Atonement, which is on the 10th day, according to the scriptures. And then that moves right into the Feast of Booths or the Feast of Tabernacles, which is from the 15th to the 21st. And then there's also a specified rest day on the 22nd. Okay? Now, did you hear that when I said that the Feast of Booths is from the 15th to the 21st? So when is this happening?
Oh, on the 21st.
The last
end of
day.
it.
The last day of the Feast of Booths.
What was the second feast? You had the Feast of Trumpets and what was the second?
The Day of Atonement.
date?
Yeah. Okay, now, again, like we talked about with that first message, that was the day of the new moon festival, and so they would likely have a larger audience. Oh, this one's like absolutely required, right? And so this would be a very large audience for Haggai, right? So we've got a ready and willing audience on this 21st day of Tishri. Okay, now what is the message? What's wrong with the people now? What does God have to say to his people?
Take courage.
Well, let's start with the problem.
Well, are they thinking that it's just not the inspired glory? Because that's what he's asking.
Yeah.
Yeah, in verse 3, Who is left among you who saw this temple in its former glory? And how do you see it now? Does it not seem to you like nothing in comparison? So does God know their hearts? Does
Yeah.
God know what they're thinking? Have they been thinking that since the foundation was laid? Yeah.
Probably.
Maybe it's even spread from not just the older people who have seen it, but they've started telling, well, it's not like it was in my day. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah.
Well, and remember, they had those hired counselors in there intimidating and discouraging.
Yeah, I mean, it's been
So that had-
14
right.
to 16 years of, this is just not gonna be what it was. Let me tell you. It's just,
Why bother?
it's not time, right? It's not time to build this temple. We'll work on some other things. We'll get some stuff done, right? And we'll go to work. But it's not time to do the temple. But we know that the work has already begun, right? In that in-between time, we have the work beginning. So, but they're busy with a lot of ceremonies, like we just talked about, right? So maybe work hasn't really gotten like the ball rolling crazy yet, because they've got some cleanup to do and they've got to get the stones all ready and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's the problem. The problem is that there is a comparison factor to a former glory, right? And it's just like at the laying of the foundation. And like Kayla was saying, there is discouragement from outside influences that's still going on. It will continue for the entire time that they are building. It will continue after they are building. So we have to keep that in the context.
And continues today.
It does. It does.
And will continue until
Yes, it
they're
does.
all in the abyss.
I know. Now, what does the Lord of hosts tell them to do?
Take
Verse
courage.
4.
Take courage.
Take courage. Who's to take courage?
Zerubbabel.
Zerubbabel and
Joshua.
All
the people.
All the people.
all you people. And what else does he tell them to do?
And work, for I
And
am with you.
Work, for I am with you. What about verse 5? Does he have an instruction for them in verse 5?
Yes.
Do
Do not
Do
fear.
not fear.
Do not fear. So we've got some clear instruction. That again, that's where I wrote on the side there. I put a little I next to it so that I would be able to say, and then I underlined what the instructions were. Okay.
And I
now-
love that the word promise is in there,
Yes.
because that should have flagged them. Oh, he's keeping his promise.
Yes, and
again.
we're going to discuss that. So, but one more question, then we'll talk about the promises. Okay, so how can they do this? How are they going to accomplish this? According to verse 4.
With God.
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
he's with them.
He says, I am with you, declares the Lord of hosts. And so then we see that he starts talking about promises. He enters into that word promises. And God's promises are encouraging them. Now, it's interesting because did you see that the promises he's talking about are past, present, for them, and future? Isn't that amazing? That he's talking about, I am a promise-keeping God. Always remember I'm a promise-keeping God. I was a promise-keeper all the way back here. I'm promise-keeping right now. And I will continue to keep my promises. So what is the past promise that he refers to in verse 5?
Brought them out of
Egypt.
Yes, but what specifically does he say? As for the promise which I made to you when you came out of Egypt, what's the promise?
His spirit.
My spirit is abiding in your midst. It's there. I'm here. I am dwelling in your midst. Do not fear. Okay, and then, so that is a present promise too, right? He's saying, it's a promise I made all the way back then, so don't worry, I'm still fulfilling it all the way up to today. So that's the present. And then,
Let me make a comment there, and you can expound on it if you want to. They knew that his spirit had been with them in the tabernacle, in the fire and in the smoke, in the Shekinah glory. So they knew exactly what that meant. It was a physical presence
yes.
for them.
Yes, but Now,
Yeah. They're not-
it's him telling them,
Correct.
my spirit is with you.
Yeah.
It is invisible, right?
Yeah.
We don't have the
True.
Shekinah glory reappearing. We don't have the pillar of fire by night. We don't have manna in the morning. You know, none of those things are happening, right? In fact, they're going through leanness, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
They're going through some lean times even when they should be going through.
So do you think that's one thing that caused, I mean, I guess we'll never know, but that could have been one thing that was causing them to, well, he must not be here because before he did such and such. Or, you know, maybe
Well,
that's
I
kind of
mean-
why they're dragging their feet.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's gotta be comparison, right?
Yeah, sure.
The times of former glory
Sure.
are not like the times of their day, right? It's not like
No.
it used to be.
No.
But they've walked through some sin, haven't they?
Yes.
And they're still continuing to walk through some sin. And so, yes, I think there could have been that discouragement that
Mhm.
is this God who he said, is he
Mhm.
real?
Mhm.
Is his promise still sure?
Mhm.
And this is God through the ministry of Haggai saying,
Mhm.
yes,
Yes.
I am with you. And do not fear, for my spirit is abiding in your midst. That's today. I am with you. Not I was with you. I am with you. And my spirit is abiding in your midst presently. Now, what about the future? Verses 6 through 9. What kind of promises does he have there?
That's what he's going to do with the second coming of Christ.
Right, and we looked at that on day 3, page 32.
Why do you suppose, and this is, I guess, a question with no answer.
Great, thank you.
Nonetheless, why do you suppose, in the midst of all of this, when people are having a hard time anyway, he gives them prophecies, like you say, of the future that they are not going to see at that moment? Wouldn't that just add to, well, he said this and it's not happening?
But they don't
look at
know-
internal. Don't look at the external nows. External nows are not.
Yeah.
Well, we know that,
But
but,
they don't know it either.
Right.
This could happen tomorrow, according to them. This is a promise of the Lord. It's the
Yeah.
same thing as him saying, I go to prepare a place for
Place for
you
you,
and
yeah.
I will come back again.
Yeah.
Do you think it's not going to happen?
yeah, no,
You
yeah,
don't.
yeah.
You think it could happen today?
It will- yeah, it
Perhaps
could
today.
happen,
It could
yeah.
happen tomorrow. If it doesn't happen today, it'll happen tomorrow. We live like that. And similarly, these people, because they know that the word of the Lord is sure, they're starting to remember that the word of the Lord is sure, that when Haggai delivers this message to them, first of all, Haggai doesn't know how quickly that's going to happen.
Correct.
It's
True,
not like he
true.
says in this many years.
True.
Now, there have been times where the prophets have said,
Mhm.
in this many
Mhm,
years, this will happen, and I will, call this person. But Haggai doesn't even know. So the people then hearing from the Lord would say, that could happen tomorrow. It could happen today. He's coming, right? His glory is going to reside in this temple. And so, yes, they would have thought, even though what we end up looking at, and let's talk about what we see in verses 6 to 9, but then we'll talk about
Yeah.
what happens. Okay?
Only because we have the full revelation of God in His Word do we
Right.
know that this is future.
Right, right. But
They-
this is just like if we had, just like as we have received from our Lord,
right,
Him saying, "I'm coming back for you," and us going, "It's happening."
yeah.
It's. I mean,
I guess I'm thinking they don't need something immediate to say, oh yeah, he is here. He is with us.
well, do we?
But like she said, we've got the word of God.
But it's so easy for us to lose hope and to lose heart too.
Sure.
So similar, it would have been easy for them to lose hope and to lose heart. But
That's one thing
we
they need
also
something more
have.
immediate.
Did you notice? And we will talk about this. That God is working in their hearts. God is stirring up their hearts so that they are obedient to Him. He is in their midst with His Spirit, so that
I guess
they're
that's why I
working
want to pat
towards
them on the
this.
back.
I know, yeah, they're finally getting it right.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah.
similar, to us that we really honestly would lose hope if not for the Word of God.
Yeah,
It's been
yeah.
2,000 years. I mean, it's about time, isn't it?
Yeah.
And yet, do we still have this hope that
Sure.
resides in us,
Sure.
that,
Sure.
that His promises
Sure.
are yea and amen? He
Yeah.
will fulfill them? Absolutely. But is it easy to lose heart? But He sent a helper. And that same helper that He sent us, He also is saying, is in your midst
Okay.
to these people.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, again, I think there's a multi answer to that. Number one, and first and foremost, is that they would have thought, if God says it, it will happen, and it could happen tomorrow. It could happen today. It's that idea of the imminency, I think that's the word, imminency of prophecy. It's not one of those things where He says, in 70 years this will
Right.
happen. And similarly, He told you, so you're going to go down into Egypt for 490 years? And He told them that before they ever went and did that, right? So there's times when God is very specific about dates and very specific about when things are going to happen. And there's times when He just says it's going to happen. And we, as His people, have to choose to trust Him, right? And He gives us the Holy Spirit as an encouragement. He gives them the Holy Spirit as an encouragement. He also gives them Haggai. And then He brings in Zechariah, so that we have this ministry that's happening, and we need that. We need the word of the Lord to encourage us, right? It's the same way for them.
And may I add to that, in
Yes.
that, had they known this was going to wait until the second coming of Christ,
Yeah.
they might not have moved.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
needed
Good point.
the pressure
Yeah.
of, in a little while.
Right. I guess I
Yes.
just don't want them to be disappointed
And
when it
remember
doesn't happen.
also that
But they
God
do
reveals-
lose their hope. Okay, but these people don't. They are stirred to action by the word of the Lord. I'm sorry, Kayla, I didn't mean to.
Quite
You're
all right.
It's-
That's quite all right.
They're stirred to action by this promise. And
That's
they
true.
know the character of God, that He is a promise-keeping God. Again, we learned that. We talked about that in the first week, which I'm kind of wishing we could take at this point, but anyway.
Me too.
But that's one of the things that He reveals about Himself to these people again. And He does it over and over and over, telling us that He is a promise-keeping God. So it's, do you choose to believe? And they do, because He's stirring up their
while.
hearts to believe. And yes, they do lose hope. But again, we're looking at it
Yeah.
on this side of
Right,
history.
right, right.
You know, Caleb, I'm sorry.
That's quite all right. I think we've kind of said it all. It's such a wonderful example for us to look at. It's very simple. God is sovereign, but He gives us free will and free choice. And He's given us an instruction on how to live, the same He gave them, exactly what to do. And they chose not to do it.
Right.
His Spirit was in their midst, and it was His Spirit. It wasn't the helper. It wasn't the same helper. It was the Spirit of the Almighty God who had traveled with them in the wilderness and the tabernacle and so on. And yet He will give them the freedom according to His timeline, and He will stir, put the pressure on, whatever it takes at the proper time.
Right. And they are being obedient to this.
Correct.
And that's the whole point of it. It's, they have turned from discouraged, fearful,
Yes.
disobedient people to suddenly these two messages. It took one message, right? But the second message comes along to encourage them even more. Now they are people who are obedient, who are saying, yeah, there's all this other stuff going on, but I'm going to stand obedient to my Lord. I'm going to trust in His promises.
And God will always give the people in the past or the future all they need to obey.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
we
you're
have the
right,
written
you're
word,
right,
but a lot of people aren't opening it or studying
Right,
it. We know
right,
that.
right.
They had the voice
The
of
voice of
God in their
God, yeah,
midst.
yeah.
You know, it's always, would you do that or would you say that if Jesus was sitting next to you? Well, no. Well, He is.
Yes,
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
have everything we need
Right.
to be obedient.
Yes. Okay, so let's talk about these future promises that He will do. We looked at this on page 32. It's question 5. It said, list the things that God says He will do in verses 6 through 9. What's he gonna do first? Shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land and all the nations. That's a lot of shaking, whole lot of shaking going on, right? Okay, so he's going to shake them, and then what next?
I will count the wealth of the nations.
Yeah, he says, I will shake all the nations, verse 7, and they, who is they? The nations will come with the wealth of all the nations. And what will happen with that wealth?
Fill this house with glory.
Yeah, I will fill this house with glory. Then he says in verse 9, what's he going to do?
I will give peace.
I will give peace to this place, right? And this place could be just the house, but it could also be for Jerusalem, right? It could also be for Jerusalem. So those are some pretty big things. So we've kind of been touching on this, but I do want to kind of draw it out in case you've never heard this before. But a lot of Old Testament prophecy has double fulfillment or multiple fulfillment, okay? So it is as if Haggai is standing on a mountain, okay? Here's Haggai. Okay? And there's a valley, and then there's another valley, and there's a valley, and then there's a mountain, there's another valley, and then there's a mountain, okay? And he sees things about the Lord. He sees things about the promises of God. He sees God say, I will do this, just like he just said, right? Now, the idea of perspective doesn't let him know if it means it's happening in this one or in this one, okay? And that there's going to be a specific, and only God knows, a specific amount of time between what Haggai sees and when it occurs. And then similarly, that there would be a specific, that only God knows, amount of time between that fulfillment and that next fulfillment, okay? So that happens a lot in Old Testament prophecy, where there is, God will, even sometimes in the same verse, say something that is going to happen pretty quickly after, and something that will not happen until Jesus comes the first time, or even something that will not happen until Jesus comes the second time. So again, it's like looking out over this future and not knowing exactly where it lays, but knowing that it will happen, right? Because it's the word and the promise of the Lord. So here, that is happening to a certain extent, right? So what kind of fulfillment are we looking at standing in this present day of Haggai, in Haggai's day? What do they think is going to happen?
What God said.
Exactly what God said, right? That he will do these things. He'll shake the heavens, and he says in a little while, right? In a little while, I'll shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land and all the nations, and I'll bring all this wealth, and I'll fill this house with glory. Now, let's think to our Ezra passage that talks about the provision according to the decree of Darius. What happens? How did they get that temple built?
Oh, they had to support, the lands that were surrounding them had to give them money to fill things, to build things.
Yeah, they took the taxes from another nation and built this temple. Does that look like it might be a little bit of a fulfillment of what Haggai told them? Now, is it a full fulfillment? Is there also something future in these things? Because do we have the filling the house with the glory? Do we see that Shekinah glory come back into the temple when this is finished?
But there is some discussion whether that is the Shekinah glory or that is the grandeur, gold and silver and
Right,
jewels and
right,
all of that.
Right. Yeah, there is that too. But then they had us look at the passage regarding Jesus coming into the temple.
Yeah.
Right.
Now we know that the Shekinah glory is the very presence of God. What is Jesus coming into the temple?
Wait, Shekinah glory is what? Say that
It's the
again.
very presence of God seated over the cherubim, over the altar.
And that was when the
That was
Shekinah
there in Solomon's temple, but it's not there for the Zerubbabel temple. But they had us then go and look at these Matthew passages that talk about Jesus coming into the temple. What is that? But the very presence of God, the very glory of God. So again, maybe we have that double fulfillment, right? Maybe we're seeing a little bit of that. But maybe there's one more mountain because he's going to come again, right? And so maybe we're looking with Haggai, like I say, across a vast mountain range, and we're seeing the events, and yet as they look to us, we can't see if they have gaps in between them or if they're all going to happen at the same time, right? So we do see that's how Old Testament prophecy is brought a lot of times, that there's a little, maybe a little fulfillment, and then maybe a little bit more, and then a little bit more, or maybe there's a little fulfillment here and then a major fulfillment or a full fulfillment later. So there's a picture of this future promise, but we can be sure, because we know God's promises are sure, and he is a promise-keeping God, that if he promises these things, they will happen. Now, today, we're living in this time. What would you say has been fulfilled of those things that he said he was going to do in verses 6 through 9? According to our study, we looked at Jesus coming into the temple. Is there anything that might be yet future?
Yeah, most of it.
Most of it, right? And yet there's probably a small fulfillment that has happened, right? That I think, or at least I believe based on our study, that it's talking about the glory of God himself in Jesus Christ coming into that temple. That Matthew passage is, I think, just really, really clear on that. We looked at that. I'm sorry, that's a Luke passage.
Okay, yeah.
On page 33, we looked at that. Luke 2, 22 through 35. And then it says in John 1:14 that we beheld the glory as of the only begotten of the Father. So we're talking about this. There's a little bit of a fulfillment there.
You know, the picture that comes to my mind, and maybe this will help a little bit, was my daughter was born cross-eyed, and they were trying to check her if she had depth perception. And they had these pictures that they would show her, that if your eyes were working together properly and you had depth perception, there was a part of the picture that
That kind of
stood
just
out
like 3D
closer,
type, yeah.
and then there was a part of the picture that would be, and then there was the farther one, and to her it was all flat.
Right.
And
right.
and because her eyes didn't work together, and so
Yeah.
she didn't have depth perception. And that's what I'm seeing here, that
Yeah.
we are seeing this picture flat. They were seeing it flat. And they couldn't tell what part was closer and what part was farther away.
Right. And
They were just seeing the flat picture.
yeah. And, we have that still today. There are certain events that will happen,
Yeah.
and we can kind of know some of the order of them, but do we know when they're going to happen in the scope of time? No, we don't, not quite. We're ready for that valley to come up to a mountain so we can have all those things happen again, right? But, that's a really, so we've got a cross-eyed prophet.
Yeah, there we go.
And
With no depth
yeah,
perception.
with no depth perception. And yet, God does that for a reason, right? He gives us, and as Kayla was saying, he gives us that because he knows what will motivate us to be obedient to him. And what will motivate that these people, they needed some encouragement, right? That this project that they were undertaking was not just some, half half-baked idea of somebody. No, this is the temple of the living God. And so he gives them this encouragement. Okay, let's move quickly to, oh my goodness. Oh, ladies, I was gonna get to the video.
No, that was my fault.
No, it's all of us, we all get off. Okay, message 3 is Haggai 2:10 through 19. I'm gonna come back over here. Okay, who gives the message?
Haggai.
Very good. This is message 3. Haggai 2:10 through 19, is that right, did I say?
Yes.
Okay. Who is Haggai?
Same guy he was before.
Yeah, before, the
Yeah.
prophet.
And he is speaking for the Lord, right? Okay, to whom or who is it addressed?
We're not told specifically, but it would be safe to assume, I think, that it's the same two people.
Okay, well, verse 11
Says to
says,
the priests, or
Yeah.
says something about the priests.
yeah, says, thus says the Lord of hosts, ask now the priests for a ruling. This is a message for the priests. And it's the reason that, there's a reason for it. It's because he's got a pop quiz for them. Okay, oh, let's do a win. Sorry, let's do a win. When is this according to verse 10?
The 9th month,
Okay, so we have the 9th month.
24th day.
It is just so specific. I love that. 24th day. Same year?
Yeah.
Same year. Okay, good.
Well, Haggai's ministry was very short-lived.
So
Yeah,
short-lived
yeah.
and yet so profitable.
Yeah.
So profitable. I mean, he really experienced obedience among these people that most prophets would have died for. Oh, wait, they did. Okay, so, sorry, that was really bad. Okay, so that means that this is in their thing. It's the 24th of the month Kislev. And that works out in our calendar to be December 18th. And this, again, the year is 520 BC. Okay? Now, just so you know, on our timeline, that between this, the 21st of Tishri in October of 520 BC, and this 24th of Kislev, December 18th of 520 BC, is when Zechariah's ministry kicks in. So we have Haggai have 2 messages to one, the leaders, and then the leaders and the people that is responded to by all the people. And then we have Zechariah come in with his first messages, and then we have a Haggai with a third message. Okay, that's just trivia for you. Okay, now what is the message? Verses 12 through 14.
It's about carrying unclean to clean, unclean to holy.
Right, I mean, it's a pop quiz. I mean, there's no other way to call it this. It's do you know what is holy and what is unclean? Do you know, what's the deal here? Okay, so what does God pronounce unclean in verse 14?
The nation, so
Yeah.
it says nation.
The people.
And the people.
And every
And every
work of their hands and what they offer up to them.
Well, he's talking about his people right now,
Yeah.
that's what he's, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's pretty heavy, right?
Oh, yeah.
They've been offering since when?
Well, probably the whole
When did they
time,
build that altar?
When they first came back.
When they first came back.
huh?
14 to 16 years later, God pronounces what they've been offering to him
Unclean.
unclean.
Ew.
Oh,
Because they haven't been obedient.
can you imagine that they might be remembering back, consider your ways, consider your ways? The words of Haggai still ringing in their ears from the first time he said something. Okay, and he comes again and says in verse 15, But now, do consider from this day onward. Do consider, and then he says it again in verse 18. Do consider from this day onward. And then in verse 18, consider. Did you see that as a key word as we walked through the book of Haggai? Okay, so, okay, let's see. I missed a question in there. Now, what has God done to bring them back to holiness, according to verses 15 through 17? He pronounces it unclean, but all this time has he just been like, well, they're unclean, it's a lost cause? Or has he been doing some things?
He's been pressing in on them.
He's been doing some things. What has he been doing?
Having them build the temple, is that what?
No,
Well, it
it's
says
in
in
16.
16. From that time when one came to a grain of heap of 20 measures, and there would be only 10. And when one came to the wine vat to draw 50 measures, there would be only 20.
Oh, so he's been taking it from their harvest.
Yeah. And then he says in verse 17, I smote you
Yeah.
and every work of your hands with blasting wind, mildew, and hail, and yet you did not come back to me. Has he been doing that for a while now?
Yes.
14 to 16 years, right? That this has been going on, that they should be experiencing abundance. They're going and saying, hey, yesterday I know I had 20 measures and there's only 10 here. What happened? And I know that I had 50 measures of wine and now there's only 20. What's going on? The Lord smote them and every work of their hands. He's trying to chasten them back to him, right? Is it getting their attention? It hadn't, not yet, right? Okay.
But because he is a covenant-keeping God, he keeps them alive.
Yes, yes.
You know, it's not easy.
Yeah.
He's putting the pressure on, but he keeps them alive.
Right, but did you notice that it says that this is before one stone was placed on another in the temple of the Lord? Right? So this is all the way back. So he's saying, look back. So we have again this consider, and it's a consideration of the past, a consideration of the present, and a consideration of the future. The first is before one stone was placed on another, right? That this stuff has been going on. Before you started building that temple, remember you did it. You started being obedient, and was it September? You started building. And we've come and we've talked about, I talked to you again in October, and here we are. And but it's been before that I've been telling you, and I've been chastening you, and I'm bringing you back, right? That's the past that he's done. Now the present, he says in verses 18 and 19, what does he say?
From this day on,
From the 24th day of the 9th month, from the day when the temple of the Lord was founded, which would be back when we looked at it before.
Correct.
When did they start building it?
24th day of Elul.
When did they start building the foundations?
Like
Oh.
14, 16.
yeah, 14 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, it's been going on for a while now. So that he's saying this is all the way back, consider. And then he says, now, 19, is the seed still in the barn? Even including the vine, the fig tree, the pomegranate, and the olive tree? What happened since Haggai started ministry?
Harvest.
A harvest of what?
Not much.
Of figs
Right.
and pomegranates. Oh, isn't that interesting? He's saying, you got your harvest. It's sitting in your barns right now, right? Is that a present promise that he's saying? Even right now, it's there. It has not borne fruit from this day on, but then he says, yet from this day on, I will bless you. Even that harvest that they brought in, this last harvest that they brought in even after they've started being obedient, wasn't a full harvest.
Right.
But God says, yet from this day, this 24th day on, I will bless you. So we have the past, that this is all, I've been chastening you, I've been trying to bring you back, all the way back from before you even started building this and placing stones on one another, all the way to the harvest that you just brought in that's sitting in your barns today that was less than what you thought it was going to be. And in the future, yet I will bless you. So do you see how we see that past, present, and future? Okay. It's not an incredibly exciting message, except for we have the promise of blessing. And is that an encouraging word?
Yes.
Because they're saying, they're looking at it going, we haven't had this, and we haven't had that, and we've tried so hard, and we worked so hard, and yet God is saying, yet from this day, mark it down on the calendar, from this day on, I will bless you. Okay, so then we have message 4, and it's Haggai 2:20 through 23. So it's a really short one, but so rich. Who gives it?
God.
God, through Haggai, right?
Correct.
Okay, so we have Haggai 2:20 through 23. It's from Haggai. It is the word of the Lord. To whom, or whom?
No, it's whom. You can just
Well,
leave whom.
okay, well, I'm, because it,
It comes after the two.
okay. To whom is it written?
Zerubbabel.
One guy. Now I've lost my ability to spell. Zerubbabel. Always add a B in case
Yes.
you're confused, just add another one. Okay, and who is he again?
Governor.
The governor of Judah. And when does this one happen?
24th day of the month.
Wait, what day?
Same day, huh?
The very same day. So he has a word for the priests. And those are the priests, those are the Levitical leaders, those are the religious leaders. Zerubbabel is what kind of leader? A civil leader. So he has a word for both on the same day, same exact day. The 24th of Kislev, December 18th, 1520, or excuse me, not 15, 520 BC. I always say when like like when you're at a checkout and it's like 1989 is the total, I always go, oh, that was a good year. 520, oh, that was a good year. Okay, so what is the message? What is God going to do according to verses 21 through 23?
Shake it all up. Overthrow everybody.
Overthrow the kingdoms, destroy the power of the kingdoms,
Yes.
overthrow the chariots.
Okay, so there's going to be some military situation too involved in here, right? And the horses and the riders will go down. Everyone by the sword of another. Okay, and then what else?
Zerubbabel will be like a signet ring.
Okay, so what does God call Zerubbabel in these verses?
He's called his servant.
Oh, his servant, you mean?
Okay, first in verse 21, he's called the governor of Judah, right? And then he's called the son of
Shealtiel.
Shealtiel. Okay, what does that tell you about him?
He's in the royal line.
He's in the royal line, right? So we know who we're talking about. What else does he call him?
My servant.
My servant. And then what else does he say about him?
Like a signet ring.
He will be like I will make you like a signet ring, or like a signet. Why?
For I have chosen you.
So he's a chosen man of God. Now, are there any instructions in this word from the Lord?
Not really.
Nope, there's not any, but there are promises. What does God promise to do?
Take it.
Well, first of all, we could go back through. I know we just talked about it, just walked through it, but we just have to say it again. I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth. I will overthrow the thrones of kingdoms and destroy the power of the kingdoms of the nations. And I will overthrow the chariots and their riders, and the horses and their riders will go down, everyone by the sword of another. Then he says, on that day, I will take you, Zerubbabel, and I will make you like a signet, for I have chosen you. Let me ask you, is this for now, or for the future, or for both?
I would think
For now.
for now. Yeah, I think it's a.
I think it's future. He's talking about on that day, when that happens in the future.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think that inclusion of that phrase in verse 23, right at the beginning, Carolyn, of that on that day, that has not been said in this,
That's true.
in any of these messages. There's something specific about that phrase when it is used in the Old Testament that's talking about a future, talking about a way future, right? And so it's kind of interesting because we see that Zerubbabel is going to be in charge, right? He's already in charge. He's already a governor. And yet God is giving him a promise that on that day, whatever day it is, I will take you, my servant, and I will make you like a signet, for I have chosen you. So it's kind of one of those, I'm just going to leave it up in the air for you to decide. We did look at some passages and that kind of thing, and we know that Jesus is a descendant of who? Of Zerubbabel,
Yeah.
right? So maybe there's some, there's some things to think about there, and then that inclusion of that word on that day kind of gets our minds thinking maybe it could be something really future and that kind of thing. Okay, but what I do want us to remember is that Haggai had a very successful ministry. The people were moved to action. How were they moved to action? We did this on page 39, day 5, question 12.
Told him to take courage, for I am with you. My spirit is abiding in your midst.
Yeah, it's reminding, Haggai was successful with these people because it was God reminding them of good things about himself. Remember we talked about in week 1 that one of the things that they said of him when they laid the temple, or when the temple was finished and they were praising him, they said, praise him for he is good, his loving kindness is forever. Do you think that they were starting to get a glimpse of just how good their God, or remember again just how good their God was by him saying, I am with you? That encouraging word. And then he also, God encouraged the people by keeping his promises, and then promising even more, right? He reminds them, I've kept these promises, and then it just keeps going. There's always going to be blessing, right? So what about that question 13? What's the connection between provision and obedience, according to Haggai?
Obedience brings provision.
Disobedience brings judgment.
And there is also an idea of it being made greater, or there being an abundance given when man is obedient to God. That when we are outside of being obedient, he may still give, right? He may still provide, and he did. He provided food for them, and he provided wine for them, and he provided those things. But was it still like not the full abundant blessing? Because they weren't being obedient. And he says it's because you're not being obedient. So that we, I don't know, it's such a hard thing, but I really do think there's a connection here. You want to be careful and not say, well, as long as I'm obedient, God's going to give me everything I've ever wanted, right? That's not what he's saying here. But he's saying it is made greater when you are walking with me, when you are doing as I have commanded you, when you are being circumspect, when you are considering your ways before me, that will come, that abundance or the greater blessing will come.
But he was obligated to them because of the covenant relationship, and he is obligated to us.
Yeah.
And I know it seems funny when we say that, but that is truth because he has initiated that.
Right.
And so he will provide for us, but it could be a meager provision.
Right.
It is the peace. When we are obedient, the peace and his presence is with us, and that is the abundance.
Yes, and it is the promises of who he is, what he has done, that remain with us, that give us, like you're saying, that give us that peace, and that we can subsist on, we can be content in all things, right?
Absolutely.
Even as Paul was.
Yeah.
Okay, now 14. Consider your ways. Is your need greater than your provision? What is God teaching you? What did he teach you through this study?
Well, I can share, because I really appreciated when we went back to those New Testament verses about not being conformed to the world. I thought that was very powerful in that that's what had happened to these people. They were looking after their own needs. You know, those outside nations, I'm sure, had some influence
Yes.
in there. I mean,
Yes.
we know they had some discouraging influence, but they also had other influence that were pulling them away from what they should have been doing. So we need to consider our ways. Are we being sucked into the ways of the world?
Right.
Are we, one of the questions was, what would you say to a Christian who says they don't have time to study the Word of God? It's so true. I mean, life is life, and
Yes,
and
yes.
and I'm not saying that's not the case, but really, do we not have time?
Well, and it's similar to, it's not time to build the house of the Lord,
Yeah.
and yet it's time to build my house,
Right.
right? It's time to make sure and provide for myself, but it's not time
Right.
to give to the Lord first.
Right.
Yeah.
And as I think about the persecuted church, if it is all taken away from us, which is, a possibility, maybe not in our lifetime, our children or grandchildren's lifetime, but will we have taken in enough and studied enough to be able to pass that on?
Yeah.
And if we're not taking the time, then we won't.
Yeah.
So I think for me, I heard a lot of consider your ways.
Yeah.
Where are you spending your time?
Yeah, where's your time, and are you giving to him before you give to yourself?
Right.
And that similarly, as far as that question about studying the word, well, what else are you doing? I mean, like if the Real Housewives of Dakota are on, and yet the Lord hasn't, I don't know. And yet you haven't spent time with the Lord today. But you know all the details of their lives, right? I mean, and I'm not trying to, it's not about the Real Housewives of Dakota, right? It's about our time with the Lord. It's about our trusting in him, knowing that his presence is with us and desiring to just be in that presence, right?
And being in a busy lifestyle, it's very easy to get where you can't see when the Lord's trying to get your attention, trying to guide you, trying to prompt your heart, because you get so busy and then you tire yourself. And if you don't take the time to meditate on his word, then when you're in the midst of all that busyness, he doesn't become the first priority.
Right.
Right.
And
Right.
the people were so concerned about it's not the glory. Well, I'm not sure if that was even really an issue, but it's not the glory of the former temple, or it's not what I want it to look like. So I'm resting in my own strength instead of just being obedient to the promise,
Right.
not looking at what it looks like.
Right.
Not rest in my strength,
Right.
resting on the Lord's power because He's with me.
Right.
Not looking at the results of it, just being obedient.
Right, and that comparison, getting into that comparison game of, well, he's blessing this,
Mhm.
but he's not blessing this. Or it's not like it used to be. My relationship with the Lord, it's not like it used to be. Well, then get it back. You know what I mean?
Right, God didn't move.
Yeah, God didn't move. I was like, he didn't go anywhere, right? And he's just calling out and saying, trust in me. Do not fear. And I love that he tells them to work.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like it's just going to miraculously build itself. And he's saying, I want you to be obedient, and the way that you're going to be obedient is not to fear and get to work. And that's how this is how this is going to happen, right? And sometimes we think, well, it'll just happen.
It'll all work out.
It'll
Yeah.
all work out, right? And we can't live our lives on it'll all work out. If we are living our lives trusting in the promises of God, we also have to be obedient to the instructions of God, right? And so those instructions tell us to do specific things, like don't be conformed to the world. Those passages that we looked up in the New Testament are for our application. They are for our instruction. They are for us to be circumspect, to consider our ways and ask, are we walking the way that we should be walking as his people?
And we cannot do that unless we are in his word.
Yeah.
It's so important. It's so important.
I think probably a better answer to that is it made me think of the names of God, Jehovah Jireh, my provider. And as I looked that up, it says that is the Lord who provides. But it literally is the Lord who sees, or the Lord who sees to it. The Lord who will see to it that my every need is met.
Yeah, and I love it because that's what these people, Haggai had this successful ministry of these people responding in such a very specific way, right? They moved from fear and disillusionment and discouragement to obedience, and the project got done. I mean, that's pretty big, and it got done pretty fast. It got done in a 4-year period, right? Once they got started back again. So they moved from fear to blessings from the Lord. And remember, it's even in the midst of discouragement, even in the midst of this is still going on, these enemies from the outside. Can we do this too?
Yes.
Do we have the same resources at our disposal that they had at theirs?
And more.
Yay, even more, right? Okay, so I can't wait to see what happens next. We're going to find out next week as we get back into Ezra and we kind of finish. We have 2 more weeks in Ezra, and then we are going to move on to Nehemiah. And it's going to be so fun. Okay, thanks for this discussion. This was a great week.
So we're not watching the video?
You know what?